Helen Cartwright rose with the soft blue light of a Cumbrian dawn spilling through her kitchen window. Keswick was just beginning to stir, mist still hung low over Derwentwater, and the birds outside chirped with mechanical cheer. It was Helen's 58th birthday, but her routine remained unchanged. She fed the cat, boiled water for tea, and set out 2 mugs, one for herself, and one for her son, Leo. He wouldn't come down, of course. Not in the morning. Leo hadn't been much of a morning person since turning 16. Now 20, he spent nearly all his time behind the closed door of his bedroom upstairs. He was studying game design remotely, at least, that's what he said. More often than not, Helen heard bursts of laughter and clicking keyboards well past midnight. She tried not to pry. On the table, Helen placed a slice of Victoria sponge she'd bought from the local bakery. She'd even tied a little bow around a new phone charger Leo had been wanting. A small peace offering, she thought. Maybe today, he'd surprise her. Maybe today, he'd come down and say, "Happy birthday, Mum." She waited. By midday, the silence was broken only by the boiler clicking on. The tea had gone cold. Helen stood and climbed the stairs. She didn't knock, she simply slipped the charger through the gap in the door. That's when her phone vibrated. It was a text. From Leo. "Wi-Fi's lagging again. Can you do something about it?" No greeting. No question. Just that. Helen stared at the screen, then let her phone drop softly onto the carpet. Her hands were dry. Her chest felt hollow. Not anger, just a slow, pressing weight. She went back downstairs and sat alone. That evening, as the shadows lengthened over the hills, Helen stood at the router and unplugged it. Not in a rage. Not out of revenge. But with a quiet clarity that surprised even her. She folded the charger back into its packaging and placed it in the drawer. She ate the sponge alone, the bow still lying on the tablecloth. Upstairs, Leo cursed. Then silence. And for the first time in weeks, the house felt still. The next morning, Helen woke to a house wrapped in an unfamiliar quiet. No music blaring from Leo's speakers, no rhythmic tapping of his keyboard, no bursts of laughter echoing from his bedroom. The usual noise that filled the corners of their modest home had vanished. The silence was almost overwhelming. Helen moved through her morning routine with a strange emptiness. She brewed tea, toasted bread, and scrambled eggs, placing them neatly on 2 plates. She set them on the kitchen table, but the chair opposite her remained empty. For a moment, she considered going upstairs to check on Leo, but she knew better. He would not come out of his room unless he chose to. Instead, she scribbled a short note, careful to keep the tone gentle. "Please come down when you're ready. We need to talk." She left it where he would surely find it, on the kitchen table beside the untouched breakfast. The day passed slowly. At the Keswick Library, Helen tried to focus on her work. She enjoyed her job, arranging books, guiding visitors through the aisles, sharing her love for stories. But no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts kept drifting back to Leo and the chasm growing between them. Meanwhile, upstairs, Leo sat in the darkened room that had become both his sanctuary and his prison. The glowing screens that usually filled his vision now lay dormant, the hum of the internet was gone. For the first time in months, he was forced to confront a silence that was louder than any message or shout. His world of online games, constant chats with friends, and virtual adventures had paused, leaving behind an uneasy stillness. Leo felt adrift, the threads that had held his daily routine unraveling. When evening came, hesitant and unsure, he made his way downstairs. Helen was sitting quietly by the window, knitting a scarf. The light from the fading sun cast soft shadows across her face. She looked up as he entered, eyes calm but steady. "We need to figure this out, Leo," she said softly, breaking the quiet. Their conversation was careful, tentative. Leo found it hard to speak openly. He confessed he had taken his mother's support for granted, assuming her patience and help would never end. Helen listened without anger, her voice steady as she explained that her sacrifices had limits. "It's not just about the money, Leo," she said gently. "It's about respect. About seeing that what I do matters. I'm not just here to keep things running while you live your life." Leo felt a weight lift, a mix of guilt and relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, they talked honestly. Helen did not scold, she offered a chance to rebuild what had been neglected. As the night grew darker, a fragile bridge began to form between mother and son, one stitch at a time. Days turned into weeks after Helen's quiet stand. The house began to feel different, as if the very air was charged with something new, unease, yes, but also possibility. Leo, faced with the reality of his mother's decision, found himself having to rethink his days. Without the constant internet connection, he tried to focus on his law studies with more discipline. His textbooks, once neglected, now became his companions. Helen gave him space but kept her boundaries clear. No more last-minute laundry requests, no more unpaid bills. Instead, she began encouraging Leo to take responsibility in ways he had never experienced before. One afternoon, Helen found Leo sitting at the kitchen table, a book of case studies open before him. He looked up and smiled, a genuine, if hesitant, smile. "I'm sorry for how I treated you," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much you did for me." Helen nodded, her eyes softening. "It's never too late to start making things right, Leo." They began to share small moments, a cup of tea, a brief chat about his studies, a quiet laugh at a clumsy knitting mistake Helen made. The distance that had seemed so harsh now carried a strange kind of healing. Yet beneath the surface, challenges remained. The balance of respect and independence was delicate, and both were learning how to walk it. Despite the gradual healing, tensions still simmered beneath the surface of their daily lives. Helen worked longer hours at the library and took on extra sewing jobs at home. She wanted to ensure that Leo's university fees and rent were covered, but she refused to be taken for granted again. Leo, on the other hand, struggled with pride and guilt. He hated feeling like a burden, yet he was slow to fully embrace responsibility. Old habits crept back, forgotten laundry, unpaid bills, and excuses. Helen noticed but said nothing at first, hoping Leo would find his own way. One evening, after a particularly long day, Helen returned home to find Leo asleep on the couch. The table was cluttered with unopened letters and his clothes still piled on a chair. Her heart clenched with a mixture of frustration and sadness. She sat down beside him, gently brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "Leo," she whispered, "we both need to be better. For each other." Leo stirred awake, meeting her gaze. For a moment, the weight of unspoken words hung in the air. "I'm trying, Mum," he said softly. "I know," Helen replied. "And I'm here. But we have to walk this path together." The storm had not passed, but a quiet understanding had begun to take root. One chilly morning, as spring began to thaw the sharp edges of winter, Helen received a letter that would shift the course of their fragile relationship. It came from the university's financial aid office. Helen's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a notice: Leo's funding had been cut due to his academic performance. Without this support, paying rent and tuition would become even harder. That evening, Helen sat across from Leo, the letter between them on the kitchen table. The air was heavy, but this time there was no blame. Just shared worry. "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure," Helen said quietly. "But this changes things." Leo looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I messed up, Mum. I'm sorry." Helen reached across, placing a firm hand on his arm. "We'll figure this out. Together. But you have to start taking this seriously." For the first time, Leo truly understood the weight of his actions. The consequences were real, and the safety net was gone. That night, their conversation stretched late into the quiet hours. Plans were made, promises given. It was a turning point, a chance to rebuild on stronger ground. The days that followed were not easy. Helen and Leo faced financial struggles and emotional hurdles, but they also found a new rhythm. Leo began working part-time at a local cafe to help cover his expenses. Helen adjusted her sewing schedule to spend more time supporting him. Their relationship, once strained and distant, slowly began to mend. Small gestures, a shared meal, a word of encouragement, an honest conversation, started to rebuild trust. One evening, after a long shift, Leo came home with a small bouquet of wildflowers. He placed them on the kitchen table and smiled shyly. "For you, Mum. Thank you for not giving up on me." Helen's eyes glistened with tears. "You're growing up, Leo. I'm proud of you." Though the road ahead was still uncertain, they had taken the first true steps towards healing. The sacrifices and struggles had taught them both valuable lessons about respect, responsibility, and love. As months passed, Leo's maturity blossomed. He managed his studies and part-time job with a new sense of purpose. Helen saw the young man she had hoped he would become, responsible, kind, and respectful. One afternoon, Leo came home with good news. His university had reconsidered his case and restored his funding based on his recent progress. Helen smiled, pride swelling in her chest. "You earned this, Leo." But alongside their joy, Helen knew it was time for another lesson. She gently explained that her financial support would now be limited. Leo needed to stand fully on his own feet. "It's not about pushing you away," she said. "It's about you learning to fly." Leo nodded, a mix of gratitude and resolve in his eyes. The journey of growth was far from over, but they had crossed an important milestone. The day came when Leo signed the lease for his own flat in town. Helen helped him pack, her heart full of mixed emotions, pride, hope, and a touch of sadness. As he closed the door behind him, Leo turned and smiled. "Thank you for everything, Mum. For teaching me, for believing in me." Helen waved, feeling a quiet strength within her. The years of sacrifice, the tears, and silent struggles had shaped both of them in ways neither could have imagined. Their story was far from perfect, but it was real. It was a testament to the power of love, even when tested by pain and disappointment. And as the sun set over the hills of Cumbria, Helen looked forward to the future, with courage, with hope, and with the knowledge that sometimes, love means knowing when to let go.